The twin suns of New Laram cast long shadows across the settlement as John Harris stood at the edge of the makeshift landing platform, watching the sleek diplomatic vessel descend through the orange-tinted atmosphere. The ship was everything their colony was not: polished, pristine, and radiating the kind of arrogance that came with controlling half a galaxy. John's weathered hands tightened on the railing as the engines whined to a stop, kicking up a cloud of red dust that would take days to settle. Behind him, the sounds of the colony carried on as usual. Children laughed as they ran between the prefabricated housing units, their parents maintaining the machinery that kept their small world running. Engineers worked on the fusion reactors, farmers tended to the hydroponics bays, and miners prepared for another shift in the deep quarries where they extracted the precious minerals that had drawn the Galactic Council's attention in the first place. 23 years. That's how long John had been on New Laram, watching a handful of desperate families grow into a thriving community of nearly 50,000 souls. He had seen the first crops fail, survived the dust storms that could strip flesh from bone, and helped build everything from the ground up. The scars on his hands told stories of manual labor, of desperate repairs in the dead of night, of a life spent making something from nothing. The diplomatic vessel's ramp lowered with a pneumatic hiss, and Envoy Milo emerged, flanked by 2 guards in ceremonial armor. The man was tall and pale, with the kind of soft features that spoke of a life spent in climate-controlled stations and artificial gravity. His uniform was immaculate, a deep blue fabric that probably cost more than most colonists made in a year. "Mr. Harris," Milo called out, his voice carrying easily in the thin air. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." John walked forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Envoy Milo, welcome to New Laram." They shook hands, and John could feel the softness of Milo's palm, the complete absence of calluses. It told him everything he needed to know about the man who had come to negotiate their future. "Impressive settlement," Milo said, gesturing toward the colony. "The Galactic Council has been following your progress for some time." "Have they now?" John kept his voice neutral. "And what does the Council think of our little outpost?" Milo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The Council believes that New Laram has tremendous potential. That's why we're here today." They made their way to the settlement's main building, a structure that served as both town hall and meeting center. Sarah Davis, John's deputy administrator and former military officer, was waiting for them. She had changed little in the 5 years since leaving the service. Her dark hair now streaked with gray, but her posture still military straight. Beside her stood Reed Carter, a bear of a man who served as their security chief and had more scars than any 3 people should carry. Dr. Catherine Montgomery joined them as they entered the building, her medical coat pristine, despite having spent the morning in the colony's infirmary. She had been studying the planet's unique ecosystem for years, cataloging everything from the hardy plant life to the strange minerals that seemed to have properties science couldn't quite explain. The meeting room was simple, with a long table, made from local wood, and chairs that had seen better days. Maps covered the walls, showing the colony's growth over the years, the mining operations, the agricultural zones, and the unexplored territories that stretched to the horizon. "Please sit," John said, taking his place at the head of the table. Milo sat across from him, his guards remaining standing near the door. "I'll get straight to the point." Milo began producing a data pad from his jacket. "The Galactic Council has been impressed with what you've accomplished here. However, we believe that New Laram's potential can only be fully realized with proper guidance and resources." Sarah leaned forward. "What kind of guidance are we talking about?" Milo's smile returned. "The Council is prepared to offer New Laram full membership in the Galactic Federation. This would provide you with access to advanced technology, improved trade routes, and the protection of the Council's fleet." "In exchange for—" Reed's voice was gruff, suspicious. "Standard membership requires certain accommodations," Milo said. "Administrative oversight, standardized laws, resource management agreements. Nothing too intrusive." Dr. Montgomery spoke up. "You're talking about the Hegemony Accords." Milo's expression flickered. I prefer to think of them as the partnership protocols, but yes, they would form the basis of our agreement. John had heard of the Hegemony Accords. They were the documents that worlds signed when they wanted council protection trade agreements and technological advancement. They were also what transformed independent colonies into administrative districts, their leaders replaced by council appointees, their resources flowing toward the Galactic conqueror. We'll need to review any proposal carefully, John said. Our people have a right to know what they are agreeing to. Of course, Milo agreed. I have a preliminary document here. He slid the data pad across the table. This outlines the basic framework. Nothing is set in stone yet. John picked up the pad, scrolling through the dense legal text. The first section seemed reasonable enough, talking about mutual defense agreements and trade partnerships. But as he read deeper, the true nature of the document became clear. Article 47 granted the Council administrative oversight of all colonial operations. Article 52 established Council authority over resource allocation. Article 68 made Council law supreme over local regulations. And buried deep in the appendix, Article 112 gave the Council the right to station security forces on any member world. This is quite comprehensive, John said carefully. We'll need time to discuss it among ourselves. Naturally, Milo said. Though I should mention that the Council is quite eager to formalize this relationship. Perhaps we could schedule the signing ceremony for the end of the week. The end of the week? Sarah's eyebrows shot up. That's 4 days. The Council believes in moving forward efficiently, Milo explained. After all, time is a valuable commodity for all of us. The meeting continued for another hour with Milo outlining the benefits of Council membership while carefully dancing around the implications of the fine print. When he finally left, promising to return in 2 days for their decision, the colonists sat in silence. Well, Reed said finally, that was about as subtle as a plasma rifle to the face. Dr. Montgomery was reviewing the document on her own pad. This isn't a partnership agreement. It's a surrender document. Sarah nodded grimly. Article 45 gives them the right to reassign personnel for optimal efficiency. They're talking about replacing us. John stood and walked to the window, looking out at the settlement. Workers were coming off shift from the mines, children were playing in the common areas, and couples walked together as the suns began to set. It was life as they had built it, with all its struggles and rewards. They think we're just another backwater colony that'll jump at the chance for Council protection, he said. They don't understand what we've built here. What do we do? Dr. Montgomery asked. John turned back to them. We prepare. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Sarah began organizing the security forces, both the official peacekeepers and the unofficial groups that had formed among the miners and farmers. Reed conducted maintenance drills that looked suspiciously like combat training. Dr. Montgomery quietly began moving critical research data to secure locations. John spent his time talking to people, visiting every district of the colony. He spoke with the engineers who kept the fusion reactors running, the farmers who had learned to coax life from alien soil, the miners who descended into the planet's depths daily. He told them about the Council's offer, about what it really meant. The reaction was unanimous. These people had built something with their hands, their sweat and sometimes their blood. They weren't about to hand it over to bureaucrats who had never felt New Laram's wind in their faces or walked through a dust storm that could blind you in seconds. On the day of Milo's return, the colony was ready. Not ready to sign a treaty, but ready for what came after refusing. Milo arrived with greater fanfare this time. His ship was accompanied by 2 escort vessels, and his security detail had doubled. Word of the signing ceremony had spread, and civilians from across the colony had gathered in the main square. Mr. Harris, Milo said, his smile broader but somehow less warm. I trust you've had time to review the terms. We have, John replied, very thoroughly. They made their way to the square where a portable ceremonial platform had been erected. Holographic displays showed the text of the treaty in multiple languages, and recording drones hovered overhead to document the historic moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Milo addressed the crowd, his voice amplified by speakers. "Today marks a new chapter in the history of New Laram. Your colony has grown from a handful of pioneers to a thriving community, and now you take your place among the great worlds of the galaxy." He gestured to John. "Administrator Harris, if you would be so kind as to affix your signature to the treaty." John stepped forward, taking the ceremonial stylus that Milo offered. The crowd had grown quiet, anticipating the moment that would change everything. "Before I sign," John said, his voice carrying across the square, "I'd like to share something with everyone." Milo's smile tightened. "Of course." John activated his own voice amplifier. "When we first came to New Laram, we were told it was uninhabitable. They said the storms would kill us, the soil would reject our crops, and the isolation would drive us mad, but we stayed. We adapted. We built something that the experts said was impossible." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. These people knew their history, knew the struggles their community had faced. "This treaty," John continued, "is being presented as a partnership. But I've read every word, every subsection, every addendum. This isn't a partnership. This is surrender." The crowd's murmur grew louder. Milo stepped forward. "Mr. Harris, please. Article 47 gives the Council administrative control over our government." John's voice rose. "Article 52 lets them decide how we use our own resources. Article 68 makes Council law supreme over the laws we've written, the laws we've lived by. And Article 112 gives them the right to station troops here on our world, in our home." The crowd was no longer murmuring. Angry voices began to rise. "This is not what was discussed," Milo said urgently. "You're mischaracterizing." "Am I?" John looked down at the treaty document. "Tell me, Envoy Milo, what happens to someone who refuses to sign one of these treaties?" Milo's composure finally cracked. "The Council expects all member worlds to fulfill their obligations. Worlds that don't sign aren't members, they're targets." For a moment, the square was completely silent. Then John lifted the ceremonial stylus, and for a heartbeat, it seemed he might actually sign. Instead, he drove the stylus down, not to sign the treaty, but to tear through it. The ceremonial document parted like fabric, the sound carrying across the square. John grabbed both halves and pulled, tearing the treaty completely in two, then into quarters, then into pieces too small to read. The crowd erupted, not in anger, but in cheers. These people had been waiting for someone to say what they all knew. They would not trade their freedom for comfort, their independence for security. Milo's face had gone pale. This is a declaration of war." "No," John said, dropping the torn pieces. "This is a declaration of independence. If the Council wants to make it a war, that's their choice." The envoy's guards were reaching for their weapons, but they found themselves surrounded by colonists. Sarah and Reed had positioned security throughout the crowd, and what had looked like a peaceful gathering revealed itself as something far more organized. "You're making a terrible mistake," Milo said. "You cannot stand against the Council." "We'll see," John replied. Milo and his delegation were escorted back to their ship under guard. As they departed, John heard him speaking urgently into a communicator, no doubt reporting the unprecedented rejection of a Council treaty. The colonists didn't celebrate long. They all knew what came next. Within hours, the comm channels lit up with transmissions from the Council. Demands for reconsideration, threats of sanctions, promises of amnesty if the colony reconsidered. John ignored them all, focusing instead on the urgent preparations that needed to be made. The first Council ships appeared in orbit 3 days later. Not the sleek diplomatic vessels, but the angular, brutal shapes of military craft. Warnings were broadcast, ultimatums delivered. Surrender or face the consequences. The colonists had spent those 3 days well. Critical infrastructure had been moved underground. Weapons caches had been established. Children and non-combatants had been relocated to the deep mining tunnels that honeycombed the planet's core. Dr. Montgomery had made an interesting discovery in those tunnels. The strange mineral properties that had drawn the Council's attention seemed to interfere with long-range sensors. The Council's ships could see the surface, but the underground networks were largely invisible to them. When the bombardment began, it was targeted at the obvious installations, the power plants, the communication arrays, the landing platforms. But these were decoys. The real infrastructure lay hidden beneath tons of rock and earth. The ground assault that followed found no easy target. The colonists had become shadows striking from hidden positions and melting away before the Council's troops could respond. Reed's combat experience proved invaluable as he taught the miners and farmers to fight like soldiers. What the Council had expected to be a quick pacification became a grinding campaign. For every tunnel system they cleared, two more seemed to appear. The colonists knew every hill, every ravine, every cave on the planet. They had been here for decades, and this was their home. The war raged for months. Other colonies, seeing New Laram's resistance, began to question their own relationships with the Council. Some declared independence. Others increased their tribute, hoping to avoid New Laram's fate. But New Laram held. The colonists used captured Council equipment, reverse-engineered their technology, and turned the planet itself into a weapon. The dust storms that had once threatened the colony now provided cover for raids. The harsh environment that had almost killed the first settlers now protected their descendants. The turning point came when a Council fleet attempting to break the deadlock entered the planet's atmosphere during a major dust storm. The mineral-laden winds interfered with their systems, causing two ships to collide. The wrecks provided the colonists with advanced technology and proof that the invaders weren't invincible. As news of the disaster spread, other colonies grew bolder. The Council found itself fighting on multiple fronts. Its forces spread thin across hundreds of worlds. The hegemony that had seemed so stable began to crack. Envoy Milo returned to New Laram for the final time, carrying a white flag instead of a treaty. He found John standing where the original ceremony had been held, now marked by a monument to those who had died defending their home. "The Council is prepared to negotiate," Milo said. Gone was his arrogance, replaced by exhaustion and defeat. "With whom?" John asked. "I thought we weren't members of your council." "You've made your point," Milo replied wearily. "What are your terms?" John looked around at the rebuilt settlement. The buildings were different now, harder, more functional. The people had changed too, tempered by war but unbroken. "Independence," John said simply. "Full sovereign recognition. No tribute, no oversight, no council installations. And in return, we won't attack your convoys passing through this sector," John offered. "Trade relations if you want them, but as equals." Milo nodded slowly. "I'll convey your terms to the Council." As the envoy left for the last time, John reflected on the price of freedom. They had paid it in blood and tears and lost friends and shattered families. But they had proven something that the galaxy had forgotten: some things were worth fighting for. The treaty that was eventually signed was very different from the one Milo had originally offered. This one recognized New Laram as an independent world sovereign within its own space. More importantly, it served as a template for other colonies seeking to break free from the hegemony. Years passed. New Laram prospered, its people proud of what they had built and held on to. The scars of war faded, but the memory remained. Children learned the story of the day their leader tore up a treaty that would have enslaved them, choosing a difficult freedom over comfortable servitude. John, now older and grayer, often stood at the same platform where Milo's ship had first landed. Where once he had seen a threat to everything he valued, there was now only empty sky and endless possibility. Sarah would join him sometimes, and they would talk about the old days. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked once. John shook his head. "The only thing I regret is that it took so long to happen." New Laram had found its place among the stars. not as a vassal or a member of some vast empire, but as a free world among free peoples. The galaxy had learned that independence wasn't something that could be taken away easily, and the colonists had learned that freedom was indeed worth any price. As the twin suns set each evening painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the children of New Laram would run through streets their parents had built and defended. They lived in a world where freedom wasn't just a word, but a reality, bought with courage and held with determination. The Galactic Council had thought they were bluffing when New Laram demanded independence. They had assumed that faced with overwhelming force, the colonists would capitulate. They had been wrong. The torn pieces of that first treaty were preserved in the colony's museum, a reminder of the day freedom was chosen over security, independence over comfort. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see them and to understand that sometimes the most important word in any language was no. And in the end, that was New Laram's greatest victory. Not just winning their freedom, but inspiring others to seek theirs. The galaxy was a bigger place now, with room for those who would chart their own course among the stars. The story of New Laram became legend told wherever free peoples gathered. It was a tale of ordinary men and women who faced down an empire and won, who proved that with enough determination any David could topple any Goliath. As John watched the last light fade from New Laram's sky, he knew that their struggle had been worth it. They had built something that would last, something that future generations would remember with pride. They had shown the galaxy that freedom was not given, but taken, and once taken, held onto with both hands. The twin moons rose, casting their pale light over a world that belonged to those who had fought for it. In the distance, the mining operations continued. The farms grew their alien crops, and life went on as it should, free, independent, and proud. New Laram had torn up more than just a treaty that day. They had torn up the idea that small worlds had to bow to large ones, that freedom was something that could be negotiated away for security. They had proven that the human spirit, when pushed to its limit, would push back. And somewhere among the stars on worlds throughout the galaxy, other colonies read the story and began to wonder, what if we too could be free? The answer came back on the stellar winds carried by the voices of those who had already learned the truth. Freedom was always possible for those willing to fight for it. The Galactic Council had thought New Laram was bluffing until they tore up their peace treaty. They discovered to their cost that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in what you can give up, but in what you refuse to surrender. And New Laram, in all its dusty, scarred glory, continued to spin through space, a monument to the simple truth that freedom once tasted would never be traded away.